Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Daily Fantasy CFL Podcast. I'm your host, John Sullivan. You may know me as Buffalo66 or know me from my Twitter page, Buffalo Hold'em, or some of the other podcasts that I'm involved with. And I want to say greetings and hello to all of the listeners who found this episode through Fear the Beard Media, which distributes my podcast through multiple platforms such as iTunes and Stitcher and Podbean, etc., etc. So greetings, everybody, and welcome to a new episode. Sorry I missed last week. I had to travel, but we're ready to get back into it. So Week 16 is upon us. We're in the midst of a playoff push. We're ready for the final quarter, 25% of the season. And right now it looks like Montreal, Toronto, and Saskatchewan are the teams that are going to be on the outside looking in. The 6 of 9 teams to make the playoffs. So let's review Week 15 and let's see what's happened lately around the league. We'll go for check out what happened the 4 games last week here. So the first game last week was Edmonton at Winnipeg Blue Bombers. It was Eskimos 40, Blue Bombers 26. Edmonton came in with a losing streak while Winnipeg had recently just had a 7-game win streak snapped by Calgary in a real close one. So this was kind of an almost must-win for the Eskimos. They're losing their grip on the last playoff spot, what they call the transfer spot. But they rallied. The best passing attack in the league came out firing. Riley put up 355 yards, 2 touchdowns. Darius Bowman and Darrell Walker each caught another TD. The Bowman touchdown in the second quarter gave Edmonton a 14-point lead. And at that point, from the second half, from halftime on, basically the teams traded scoring through the second half. Edmonton won the turnover battle, which shows when they make fewer errors than their opponents, they're just a tough team to beat. John White returned to the starter's role, 104 yards and a touchdown. And Tim Flanders has been very impressive as the replacement running back for Winnipeg. Although Andrew Harris should return soon, Flanders has been putting up significant yardage every week. But Eskimos kind of got out in front here and just was able to somewhat coast to victory. And the second game last week was Calgary at Hamilton, and it was Stampeders 36, Tiger Cats 17. This game was really an insta-bet for me. Hamilton's head coach Ken Austin was suspended for this game, and the Canadian Football League in-game coaching matters tremendously. I've spoken in the past about how some coaches they will challenge plays that are not challenged, cannot be reviewed. They'll make some bad usage of game management or personnel decisions, and Ken Austin is one of the better coaches in the league, and him not being on the sideline was a real detriment to Hamilton. So I bet this game early, and that really paid off. Austin is a good head coach, and the Calgary head coach is also good. Calgary kept rolling, was very good on both sides of the ball. Bo Levi Mitchell was just average, 293, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. But, you know, he's the game manager, and they were able to overcome their mistakes. Hamilton was completely ineffective at moving the ball. They tried both quarterbacks, and they gave up a safety and a return touchdown at the end. There's really not much else to say about this game other than it was an easy cover at -2.5. I think it actually stayed under 54 at 53 points, but I saw that line, and I less than a field goal in that situation Coaching matters. A lot of people don't realize that, especially in fantasy where you don't pick coaches. So moving on to the third game of the week, we had Ottawa at British Columbia. And the final score was Red Blacks 33, BC Lions 40. And this was easily the bad beat of the year for me. I'm not a huge complainer when it comes to my own wagers, but this one was a tough one to swallow. This is a very competitive game, back and forth, offensive fireworks, scoring early and often. But Ottawa had the ball, down by a point, 34-33, with about 9 seconds left, and they threw a pick six to lose by 7 when I had Ottawa at plus 5.5. And there were so many things that could have happened to prevent that last touchdown from being scored, such as the Calgary defender either running out of bounds or just falling on the ground instead of trying to return it for a touchdown, or Ottawa actually trying to stop him from scoring, which they didn't really look like they made that much of an effort, or maybe Trevor Harris throwing the ball down the field instead of on an out and third and long. Probably would have prevented a touchdown there, but it happens. This is the second time this season that a late fourth quarter Trevor Harris turnover has cost me a cover. I also had Ottawa against Calgary, and he fumbled. That was returned for a touchdown in the last 2 minutes of a game that cost me a cover. But such is life of a sports bettor, and I will try not to complain much more about those types of things. But both quarterbacks here were excellent, and Trevor Harris had 485 yards, 2 touchdowns, and that aforementioned pick, while Jennings had 348 yards and 3 touchdowns. British Columbia was able to run the ball effectively here. Their kicking game was so-so. They missed 2 extra points. Rich Leone is the kicker and the punter, and he's an excellent punter, but his place kicking has been spotty this year. Chris Williams had his first big game I can remember in a while with 155 receiving yards. I really feel like Ottawa let this one get away, but however, they've shown they can compete with elite teams if they eliminate mistakes, and that's been a big knock for them this year. They've made a lot of penalties on the defensive side of the ball, and their execution penalties, they're not always just pass interference. Personal fouls, offsides, those types of things, unsportsmanlike conduct. Those are the kind of penalties that if you can eliminate those and eliminate turnovers, you're going to be competitive. And Ottawa has the offense to do that as long as, they don't fumble the ball or they don't throw the picks. So moving on to the last game of the week, it was Toronto at Montreal. And this game was not only the least interesting, but the most lopsided, as the Alouettes won 38-11. And this game, as I said, was an absolute whitewash. Montreal seemed to respond to their new coach and produced a lot more offense than usual. Rakeem Cato only had 210 yards but 4 passing touchdowns. Although I feel this game was really won by the Montreal defense with 3 takeaways. Drew Willie, who was recently traded to Toronto, was average in his first Toronto start. He had 200-something yards. I don't believe he had a touchdown pass. Both teams ran the ball very well. Montreal basically dominated the field position here. Toronto has lost 7 of their last 8 games, and they're actually facing losing out on the last playoff spot. It's basically Toronto and Edmonton right now are the 2 teams vying for that, and Edmonton has a 2-game lead. So that's where we stand from Week 15. We're in kind of the silly season where Saskatchewan and Toronto especially have made a lot of roster changes to try out talent for they're kind of playing for next year, even though Toronto still has a shot and making the playoffs this year a mild one. And of course, Montreal has changed their coaching staff, and they're trying out their young quarterbacks, Cato and Adams, to see who's going to be the leader of the team going forward. So you have some teams that are resting up for playoffs. They have some teams that are fighting for playoffs, and some teams that are basically playing out the string and trying to tune up for next year. So it's an interesting time of the year, but it's good for bettors. I think there's a lot more predictability in the last quarter of the season. So we'll do the preview shortly, but since I don't have to travel this week, which is why I missed the podcast last week, I'm very excited to be able to play some CFL Daily Fantasy Sports again. And 2 weeks ago, I got to play some tournaments and competed for the win. I had, I believe, 3 top 20 finishes and 1 top 10 finish. It had a nice little profit, even though only one of my lineups actually finished in the money, but it was highly competitive. And once again, I've decided to enter some GPPs or tournaments, large field tournaments as they're called, and I'm going to go with a multiple lineup strategy. I entered them 6 times each, and hopefully I can turn another profit and grow some bankroll these last few weeks and just keep playing CFL for the last 5 weeks of the regular season and see what we have to go with. I have been putting cash lineups up. It's been a funny season because I hadn't been able to play at all until about halfway through the season because of the New York State law or lack thereof. So now that I can play, I'm feeling the tournaments a little bit more than the cash game. So we'll see how it goes. As I talk about DFS, this is a good time for me to tell you about rosters.com. If you want to give DFS a try, I recommend that you check out rosters.com, as they're nice enough to sponsor this podcast. If you use the sign up, go over there, check them out. If you use the sign up code CRAZY, you'll get a $20 bonus on a $10 deposit, and that will give you $30 to play with right away. No crazy release deals on the bonus money. And this is a great chance for you to try out salary cap DFS without much risk, and maybe you can build a little bankroll. So again, that's rosters.com and sign up code CRAZY. So go ahead and check them out. And again, thank you for sponsoring us through Fear the Beard Media. So now this is a time of the podcast where we talk about Week 16 of the upcoming week, the last quarter of the regular season, and let's take a look at the games on the Canadian Thanksgiving holiday weekend. For those of you that don't know, Canadian Thanksgiving is this coming Monday, which is a Columbus Day in the USA. But they like to celebrate their their Thanksgiving earlier, and they like football on their Thanksgiving just like we do. So those last 2 games will be on Monday. But let's get going, looking at the full slate here. The first game is Friday night is Saskatchewan at Ottawa. Ottawa Red Blacks -6, and 53 is the over-under here. Now, the Rough Riders have won 2 in a row, and they've covered 5 straight games. And the Red Blacks, despite being 6-1, actually have a comfortable playoff cushion, about a 3.5 game cushion in the East over Toronto. So it's not really a must-win for them, but they would get a bye if they finish first in the East, and I believe they have 1 or 2 games over Hamilton right now. So Saskatchewan quarterback Darian Durant left the last game with a self-imposed concussion protocol. He took himself out in the third quarter, but he's expected to be back. They had last week off, so they've had 2 weeks to rest up. I really think Mitchell Gale is the better long-term option at quarterback for Saskatchewan, but both quarterbacks have been able to move the offense. I also like the Saskatchewan running game very much here with Curtis Steele back for them. I would count on him for 80-something yards here. However, Saskatchewan's been playing very well, and I expect this game to finish under. I do like the under very much at 53. I do choose some Ottawa players for my GPP lineups. You definitely have to take Trevor Harris in at least one lineup and mix and match a few wide receivers. Their running game is kind of by committee, so I would pass on the running backs there. But this game is under, so maybe these teams would be good options for defense, team defense in your daily fantasy games. But as far as betting goes, I like the under here, and I also like Saskatchewan if it gets to +7. Very much at +7.5, but 6 is kind of iffy. But Saskatchewan is a very underrated team. 7 makes me a lot happier, but I don't really like the side either way at 6. Moving on to the Saturday game, we have BC Lions at Winnipeg. Right now, Winnipeg is a 1.5 point favorite, and 54.5 is the total. And the Blue Bombers have been the streakiest team in the CFL. They've lost 2 straight after winning 7 straight. And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Tim Flanders has been the value play at running back. I think he's a must-play if he starts over Andrew Harris. I'm sure he's gone up in price. I haven't looked at the prices, but he's got to be one of the best values of all the running backs out there, unless you manage to take a return guy at running back. And speaking of running backs, Chris Rainey has been a bigger part of the British Columbia offense, and he's still doing all the returns. So I like him more and more every week. You can look, they try to get him the ball in touchdown situations. The Lions have been rotating their starting running backs, so check the depth chart. They actually have been switching running backs back and forth and actually not even dressing one or the other. And this is designed to rest these guys up for the playoffs, which is genius by Wally Buono, the head coach. But you need to consider, they're both good options. You just need to consider which one is going to be going this week. Now, the quarterback, Jonathan Jennings, has been feast or famine this year. And I think this is a tough matchup for him on the road, and it's a potential snow-cold game. I'm not saying it's going to be a blizzard, but there might be a dusting of snow. So it's not in the confines of a friendly dome for them. Jennings is still worth a flyer in tournaments, but as a cash game play, I would avoid him this week. But even though it is going to be a cold game, I do like the over at 53. But I think Winnipeg is ready to bounce back from their losing streak. I like the Bombers at a pick'em, or maybe just take them on the money line. 1.5 points is not much of a spread, so I would think you'd be able to get them at better than -120. And that's a reasonable odds to play the money line. But we'll see how this goes. This game I expect it to be competitive. I just see you have 2 decent defenses here, and I see that game going under. So that's my strongest opinion. On to Monday. We have Edmonton at Montreal, and Edmonton is a 3-point favorite on the road, and the over-under is 51.5. And the Alouettes are a team that has nothing to play for, so they'll be loose and willing to take chances. Again, they got their new coaching staff, and they're trying to develop chemistry. That team has had infighting and all kinds of psychological issues, not to mention injuries. So they've really got, they're just playing for themselves right now. And the Eskimos need to win 1 or 2 more games to really lock up that transfer spot. They can compete for the 2 seed in the West, but it doesn't give them a bye. Only the 1 seed gets a bye. So, but they just need to win 1 or 2 more to lock up a playoff spot. I actually believe that whoever gets the transfer spot in the West has a great shot of making the final, making the Grey Cup, because the East is so weak this year. So if Edmonton or Winnipeg happens to transfer over to the East side of the playoff bracket, that's really good for them. That's almost kind of what you want, instead of having to play BC and Calgary to get to the Grey Cup final. So I think Rakeem Cato for Montreal would be a great GPP pick this week. He develops more time under this new coaching staff. He didn't have a lot of yards last week, but he had 4 touchdowns. His ability to pass has never really been an issue. It's more about getting time to throw. BJ Cunningham has been their most consistent receiving option. Everybody knows Deron Carter is the stud on that team, but Cunningham, you can almost count on a half a dozen targets and 80 to 100 yards. On the Edmonton side of the ball, all the usual studs are in play. The same guys I talk about every week. I really like the over here. I think Edmonton will win, but Montreal will score some points. They scored 38 last week. I think they're energized with the new offensive schemes, and they could put up 24 easy. So if Edmonton could put up 28, that's 52 right there. So over is my strongest lean. And then finally, closing it out on Monday, we have the Stampeders at Toronto Argonauts. Stampeders are 9-point favorites on the road, and 52.5 is the total. Thanksgiving Day ends with what appears to be the biggest mismatch of the week. Argos are a complete mess, and then after their last loss, the coach went out and cut 3 of their top wide receivers, Elliott, Hazleton, and Gurley. Basically, he's put the team on notice that nobody's job is safe. The other problem is who's going to start a quarterback for the Argos. Is it going to be Ricky Ray, Drew Willie, or Dan Lefevre? Now, you think this game is hugely in favor for the Stamps. Whenever the public is all over a heavy favorite like Calgary, it's really time to consider backing the dog if you're a sports bettor. In a parity league, teams usually respond from poor performance, especially at home. So, I'm leaning towards going for the Toronto cover here, especially if it gets into double digits, which it may. People try to make up their losses from NFL or whatever. I could see that happening. I'm actually not seeing many DFS options on the Toronto side of the ball, but I do expect a closer game. Calgary has just been rolling all season long. Try to find room in your lineups for their top options. I've always said I just don't think it's worth it to pay up for Mitchell because he doesn't put up the number. He puts up a high floor but not a high ceiling. I do like Brandon Whitaker for the Argos, especially if their passing game suffers. He's going to get the ball a lot. I'm probably going to pass on Deontay Spencer. I like the fact that he returns punts, but assuming Calgary does roll in this game, he's not going to see many punts. So it's all about how many passes he's going to catch. And if you don't know who the quarterback's going to be, it's going to be tough to figure out who's going to be catching the balls, and that's just a mess. So I'm probably going to go pretty light on Toronto players in DFS this week, but I just have a feeling that either Toronto will cover this game or they're going to lose by 25. They'll just give up and fold like a cheap suit. We'll see what happens. But if that gets to 10 or especially 10.5 or 11, I might take a flyer on Toronto. It's just one of those go against the crowd type of plays that I don't automatically do those, but at that number it becomes very attractive. So that's our episode for today. Remember, you can find all of my picks and my CFL betting record, which I update every month, on my Twitter page, which is @BuffaloHold'em. Please feel free to contact me if you have a question or a comment. You want some DFS advice or some betting advice, it's free. I'm not saying it's good, but it's free. I also archive all of my podcasts on my YouTube page, which is also named Buffalo Hold'em. So if you don't check out my podcast on any of the popular platforms, you can find them there. So everybody enjoy your Thanksgiving poutine, and let's watch some football. Hope you tune in next time. Thanks for listening. Take care.